In addition to the two data models, raster and vector, there are many different file formats as well. Some formats are designed to store vector data and some are designed to store raster data. In this task, I'll explore some of the file formats included with the Lab 1 data. So here I have QGIS Desktop open from the first task, and let's start by just exploring the file formats of the three rasters that are loaded into the project. So if I double click on the Landfire EVT raster data set, we can go to the General tab. And first of all, I can just see that the layer source is a .img file. And with some experience, you'll know that a .img is an ERDAS Imagine image. But I can also go to the Metadata tab, and it'll show me the driver being used by Google to read this data set. So it shows you right there that it is indeed an ERDAS Imagine image. So I'll cancel to close. So let's move on to the next raster. I'll open up the layer properties for the false color composite image. And on the General tab, I can see that it ends in .tif. So again, with some experience, you'll come to understand that this is a geotiff, a kind of TIFF that has spatial reference information encapsulated with it. If I go to the Metadata tab, I can see again that the Google driver that's being used to read this data set is the geotiff driver. And the DEM, the third raster data set, again going to the General tab, it ends in a .dem extension. So this is a USGS-DEM, and I can verify that by going to the Metadata tab and seeing that it is a USGS-DEM file. The raster data model has a lot of different file formats associated with it. There are literally dozens, so it's not uncommon to come across many different file formats for rasters when you're starting out a project. I'll hit cancel to close. I'm going to bring up QGIS Browser, and I'm navigated to the Lab 1 data folder. I can see the three raster data sets. I can see several shape files, some text files, a couple XML files. But there are also these two folders, Info and Vegetation. This is an older file format for storing vector data called a coverage. The Info folder holds the attributes, so this is similar to a DBF file for a shape file. And then the Vegetation folder is the layer name, but it also stores the spatial features, so it's equivalent to the .shp of a shape file. Sometimes you'll see coverages exported as a file which ends in E00. The E00 file is an exported coverage and is also known as an interchange file. And this format is for data sharing. Since this file format gets a little messy with two folders, it became problematic for people to email this and move it around. So there is an exported format which essentially compresses all of the layers information in both folders into a nice neat file that can be shared. And if you do run across an E00 folder, the files can be read into QGIS. So I'm going to bring up QGIS Desktop again, and I'll add that coverage to QGIS Desktop. So I'm going to use the Add Vector Data button. The coverage is a vector data format. And up until this point, we've always used a source type of file, which is what you would use to add a shape file. But remember the coverage data model has the data in folders. So this is a directory storage type. And I'll click the drop down for source to ArcInfo binary coverage, which is another name for this file format. I'm going to click the Browse button and navigate to my Lab 1 data folder. And here I just want to select the vegetation folder. I don't want to double click and go into it. I want to just select the folder and click the Select Folder button. Then I can click Open. And what I get is a Select Vector Layers to Add. And this is because of a special property that coverages have. They can store multiple geometries. So a shapefile has to be either point, line, or polygon. However, a coverage can have all three geometries. This vegetation data set has two polygon components, and you can see on the right-hand side under geometry type, there's two that are listed as polygon. It has a line component and a point component, which would be for labels. I'll select the Landfire EVT layer and choose OK. I'm going to drag this to the top of the raster data so that I can see it. So this is a vector version of the land fire EVT raster layer. So here we have the same data set as a raster and as a vector data model as a coverage. And with this layer, I can open up the attribute table like I would for any other vector layer. If I wanted to export this as a shapefile, so I had it in that file format, I can right click on it and go to Save As and save this out as a shapefile. So I'm going to bring up QGIS Browser again. And again, I've navigated to the Lab 1 data folder, and I'll select the data folder here so that I get the contents of the data folder under the Params tab. And you'll notice there's one file here, recreation site point.kmz, that shows up here as a file in the data folder, but it doesn't show up as a layer in the layer tree. KMZ is compressed KML. KML is keyhole markup language. This is the native format for Google Earth, and it's a very common geospatial file format these days. So in order for QGIS Desktop to read this data, the KMZ file must be decompressed. So now I'll decompress this file, and the method for doing this is going to depend on your operating system. It'll be different for Windows users versus Mac versus Linux. But each operating system comes with compression software that allows you to compress and uncompress files. So I'm on a Windows 7 computer. I'm going to bring up Windows Explorer, and I'm going to right-click on this layer, and under the context menu, there's an option for 7-zip, and this is the decompression software I'm using. 7-zip is an open source decompression software, and I'll simply choose Extract here. And once I've extracted it, I have the KML data that was inside that KMZ file. And the KML is what I can actually add to QGIS Desktop. So I'll bring up QGIS Desktop. I'm going to turn off my coverage. I'll click the Add Data button. This is a file data set, and I'm going to change the filter to KML, keyhole markup language. I see the layer now showing up. I'll click Open and Open. And as with the coverage, I'm presented with this Select Vector Layers to Add dialog box. There are many different feature layers within this particular KML file. I'm just going to select two of these. I'm going to select Picnic Site, and I'll hold the Control key down and choose Trailhead and click OK. And it'll just add those two to the map. Picnic Site is a point layer, and so is Trailhead. In the next lab, you'll learn how to create a new spatial light geodatabase and import all your project data into it.